The Galactic Council's annual feast was a spectacle of opulence that stretched across 3 orbital platforms above Centauri Prime. Representatives from dozens of species gorged themselves on delicacies from across the galaxy. Their conversations, a symphony of clicks, growls, and harmonious tones that spoke of trade agreements worth trillions of credits. Marcus Chen sat at the human delegations table, his plate barely touched as he watched the scene unfold with growing disgust. The humans had only recently been granted membership to the Council, a decision that many species still questioned, openly. In the shadows between the grand tables, something caught his eye. A small figure huddled against the wall, thin arms wrapped around bony knees. The creature was no larger than a human child, with translucent blue-gray skin and 4 delicate arms. Her species' name escaped him, but he recognized the universal language of hunger and despair. "Pathetic Zenth scum," sneered a nearby Korthak representative, his reptilian features twisted in amusement. "Look how it begs with those huge eyes." A group of Vrellan traders nearby burst into their species' equivalent of laughter, a harsh chittering that made Marcus's skin crawl. One of them tossed a piece of rotted fruit that splattered near the small being's feet. "Dance for it, waste of space," called out another, this time a hegemony official whose crystalline form sparkled with cruel mirth. The Small Zenth, for that's what she was, Marcus now remembered, didn't move. She simply stared at the scattered food with those enormous, dark eyes that seemed to hold the weight of 1,000 disappointments. Her lips, tinged blue with malnutrition, trembled slightly. Marcus had heard whispers about the Zenth. Once a proud, spacefaring civilization, they had made the mistake of trusting. The wrong allies during the Rim Wars 3 centuries ago. Their homeworld was now a strip-mined wasteland, their people scattered as indentured servants and worse throughout the galaxy. The fortunate ones served as translators and data processors, their natural telepathic abilities making them valuable despite their species' pariah status. "Disgusting creatures," muttered Ambassador Vexatar of the Altarian Consortium, loud enough for Marcus to hear. "The Council should never have allowed even one of them on this station. They carry disease, you know, probably stealing scraps to sell on the black market." More laughter erupted from nearby tables. Even some of the supposedly civilized species joined in, finding sport in the suffering of someone they deemed beneath notice. Marcus felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. He'd seen this before, in history books about his own species' darker chapters. The dehumanization, the casual cruelty, the way decent beings could become monsters simply by following the crowd. Standing abruptly, Marcus grabbed his untouched plate, loaded with genuine earth salmon, hydroponic vegetables, and synthesized delicacies that had cost more than most beings earned in a year. The conversations around him faltered as he walked directly toward the Zenth. "Marcus!" hissed Ambassador Rodriguez from behind him. "What are you doing? You'll create an incident." But Marcus was already kneeling beside the small figure, offering his plate. Up close, he could see the careful patches in her simple gray clothing, the way her 4 hands shook with weakness, the intelligence that still burned in those dark eyes despite everything. "Hey there," he said softly, his universal translator converting the words into her native tongue. "I'm Marcus. What's your name?" The Zenth stared at him in shock, then glanced nervously around at the dozens of beings now watching with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. I am called Whisper of Stars Between Worlds," she said, her voice barely audible and musical despite her condition. "But the others, they call me by number. Translator Unit 4471. "Well, Whisper of Stars Between Worlds is a beautiful name," Marcus replied, settling the plate between them. "Much better than mine. Would you like to share dinner with me?" The alien's eyes widened impossibly further. I cannot. I am not permitted to eat with council members. It is forbidden." They will punish... They'll punish no one, Marcus interrupted, his voice carrying just far enough for the nearest tables to hear. You're my guest, and anyone who has a problem with how I choose to share my meal can take it up with me personally. A Korthak representative stood up, scales bristling with indignation. Human, this is inappropriate. That thing is property of the hegemony. You cannot simply... Marcus rose to his full height, and suddenly every eye in the vast hall was on him. The human delegation's table had gone dead silent, their faces pale with diplomatic horror. But Marcus felt a strange calm settle over him, the same feeling his grandfather had described when he'd faced down segregationists in the American South decades ago. Thing? Marcus repeated, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet hall. I see a sentient being who was invited to this station to provide translation services and is being denied basic hospitality. I see someone who has contributed more to galactic civilization in the past hour than most of us will in our lifetimes. And I see a lot of supposed advanced species acting like schoolyard bullies. The silence stretched, broken only by the soft hum of the station's life support systems. The Zenth are parasites, spat the hegemony official, his crystalline form pulsing with angry red light. They deserve nothing. Deserve nothing? Marcus smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Let me tell you what humans have learned about deserve. Every species in this room has, at some point in their history, been considered inferior by someone else. The Korthak were enslaved by the First Empire for 2,000 years. The Vrelans were nearly exterminated by their own civil wars. Even your precious hegemony started as refugees fleeing a dead star. He gestured around the hall, his voice growing stronger. We've all been the underdog. We've all been the outcasts. The only difference is that some of us remember what that felt like. Marcus knelt back down beside Whisper of Stars Between Worlds and picked up a piece of salmon with his fingers. My species has a saying, the true measure of a civilization is how it treats its most vulnerable members. We've failed that test before, and it nearly destroyed us. But we learned. He offered the food to the Zenth, who took it with trembling hands. We learned that when you lift up those who have fallen, you don't diminish yourself. You become more than you were. As Whisper of Stars Between Worlds ate, that first bite, tears streaming down her face, something shifted in the great hall. A few beings looked ashamed and turned away. Others muttered angrily and left their tables. But some, a surprising number, began to approach. A young Altarian diplomat was the first to arrive, carrying her own plate. Then came a Korthak junior ambassador, followed by several others. Not all of them, not even most, but enough. As they settled around Marcus and Whisper of Stars Between Worlds, sharing food and asking gentle questions about Zenth culture and history, the small translator began to smile. It was the first time in years that anyone had asked her about her people's poetry, their lost technologies, their dreams for the future. Why? She whispered to Marcus in between bites of the first real meal she'd had in months. Why did you do this for me? Marcus looked around the growing circle of beings, some of whom had been bitter enemies that morning, now listening intently. As Whisper of Stars Between Worlds described the aurora songs of her destroyed homeworld. Because, he said quietly, someone once told me that the universe doesn't care if you're human, Zenth, or anything else. The only thing that matters is whether you choose to make it a little bit better or a little bit worse. Tonight, I chose better. The feast continued around them, but something had changed on the station that night. Word spread through the corridors and data networks about the human who had stood up to the entire Galactic Council for a single starving translator. Some species dismissed it as typical human arrogance. Others began to wonder if perhaps these newcomers understood something that the older civilizations had forgotten. As the artificial dawn broke through the station's viewports, Whisper of Stars Between Worlds was no longer alone, no longer hungry, and for the first time in years, no longer without hope. And Marcus Chen had learned that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought with weapons or words, but with simple acts of common decency. The galaxy was vast and often cruel, but on that night, in that place, humanity had shown that even the smallest light could push back the darkness.